guys to the first installment of a new series or group of videos that I'm going to be doing, which I'm going to be calling What the Franchise. So basically what this is going to be is I'm going to highlight some things within CFM that I don't like or that don't make sense to me, and basically things that make me say what the F in terms of franchise, hence the name What the Franchise. This isn't going to be just about bashing stuff or bashing CFM so much as it's going to be about trying to improve on these things. I'm going to go through the stuff that I don't like, explain why I don't like it, explain why it doesn't make sense to me, and then do my best to offer a solution for that. That's always been the way I've been when it comes to feedback, and I'm going to try to make this like that as well. So getting right into it, the first one I'm going to be talking about today is performance-based progression. Now that's kind of a loaded term there, but the main thing I want to focus on is basically how XP can be so predominantly accrued through things like Player of the Week awards, season awards, Pro Bowls, and statistical goals. And the main issue I have with that is it's essentially backwards to how a progression model should work, in my opinion. In real life, you get to practice, or you practice to get better, and then the performance is a result of that practice, whereas in Madden you have a very minimal gain through practice, and you're potentially gaining thousands upon thousands of XP through these awards that can be applied to any attribute, and then also even have the ability to change development traits through these awards as well. And one of the issues with that is that you can do things like put a guy back as a kick returner and essentially make him a lock for the Pro Bowl just by returning kicks all year, and then at the end of the year you receive this huge chunk of XP for that. And just to touch on XP for a second, I don't really have much of an issue with XP itself, because in reality it's just the medium. When you look at UFC3, which I think is a great progression system, that is essentially using XP as well, just in a little bit different way, and the mechanics are different behind it. So I think there are ways to make it work within CFM, but the current mechanics and how you accrue and can distribute that XP is what I have the biggest issue with. So going back to that kick returner example, you have a situation where you get this dump of XP and you can basically apply that anywhere across the board to any of your attributes, and that's the issue I have, because it doesn't really make any sense. How can returning kicks all year, or simply winning an arbitrary award, or making a Pro Bowl suddenly make a player significantly more aware, or have better hands, or even become faster? That's the kind of thing I don't really want anywhere near my franchise, just because it's not logical and there's really no rhyme or reason behind it other than saying, well, it's a video game and that's how it works. I will give credit where it's due though. Adding practice last year, or maybe the year before that, and the ability to gain XP from that was a move in the right direction, or a step in the right direction. But I think as it stands currently, things are just still far too slanted in that performance-based direction, which, like I said, is backwards to how I'd like to see things work. But when you look at the XP system in general, I think it's something that works fine in a singular career mode, whether it be a superstar mode or anything like that, where you're controlling your one player. But once you start to get into controlling a whole team, or essentially role-playing a coach or a GM, and you're looking to emulate real-life mechanics, I think you really start to lose me, at least, with that stat-chasing, gamey, arcadey, RPG-type mentality and approach. And I understand what they're going for, in that you want users to have more control, and you want users to feel rewarded for performing well with players, but at the same time I feel like there's just too much control and freedom given in that regard, and that the way the control can be applied isn't necessarily done in the right way. When I look at a game like UFC3, which, like I said, I think is a phenomenal system, in that you still have control, in that you get to choose what attributes you're upgrading through what or how you decide to train. It makes sense, and you don't get those same elements that you get like in Madden, where you earn a performance of the night or a knockout of the night, and then you arbitrarily get a bunch of points to upgrade any of your attributes. Everything you upgrade is a result of training rather than performance, which is essentially what I want to see out of Madden. You get things like my punching power or my takedown defense doesn't get better as a result of knocking a guy out or defending a takedown, or winning an arbitrary award. The reason why those things happen is a result of specific things that I've done in training that have prepared me to do that. But one issue I do have with UFC as well as Madden system is that there are no caps on attributes. So even though with UFC where you have this great cause and effect system when it comes to progression, you're basically just following steps to inevitably be able to create a maxed out character. And like I said, when you're playing a singular career mode, I feel like that's fine. You can do that. It is what it is. That's almost what you're working towards in those solo career modes. So I don't have an issue there. But like I said, when you look at when I look at franchise and you start to look at controlling an entire team, I think you really need to rein that in quite a bit and have more of a structured and almost more restrictive system. And I think the show is a great example of how you can do that. If you haven't seen the Road to the Show info that they just released, basically what happens within that mode is your character has attribute caps based on the archetype, which I think is great. So if you choose a defensive wizard archetype, then your player has low caps for things like hitting and very high caps for things like fielding and speed. And that is something I would love to see in Madden, because I've always been a firm believer in the thought that you essentially are what you are as a player. A guy like D. Gordon is never going to be a 40 homer a year player. Shaquille O'Neal was never going to be a 3-point threat or a 90% free throw shooter. Guys like Deion Sanders were never going to become big hitters. That's just the way it is. That's the way those guys are built. So all in all, my main issues with progression is how XP is accrued and then also how it can be distributed, which is when you look at it, it's essentially the entire dynamic of the system. So that's two really big problems to have. But looking at how to improve it, or how I'd improve it, I'd basically take the best parts of UFC and Road to the Show system and basically mesh them together. So firstly, I'd put caps on intangible attributes based on dev trait and player type. So a player comes into the league with an 80 for an attribute but has superstar dev trait. So his cap might be a 92 or higher on that particular attribute. While a player with slow would have a much lower cap of say 82 or maybe even 80. Maybe he's already peaked in regard to that attribute. One thing I would do with that as well is allow for players with superstar dev traits to have much higher caps across the board, to allow them to break the mold, so to speak, of player and archetypes. So going back to that defensive wizard example, a guy with superstar dev would be allowed to have much higher caps in something like hitting than a guy with the same archetype that had a normal dev. Secondly, I would get rid of the huge XP bonuses for things like awards and Pro Bowls and statistical goals, and have XP accrue predominantly through practice, or at the very least have the option to get away from those kind of things and go that route. I would treat practice like training in UFC3, where what you choose to practice in turn gains XP towards certain attributes for your players. I would have the medals that are in place currently emulate a good, average, or bad practice. So good practices grant more XP than normal, bad practices grant less XP than normal, and then have that be on a player-by-player basis rather than an entire unit like you see currently in Madden. I would have the amount of XP that a player gains based on their dev trait also factor in things like injuries and morale. Coaching stats would be another one that you could factor in there. Basically you could have position coaches or just coaches in general with discounts or practice multipliers for certain attributes to emulate something that they're more knowledgeable at or better at teaching. Maybe even you could have coaches that will raise the cap of a certain attribute as well for players, is something you could do. And in doing practice this way, it gives you control over what you're upgrading or progressing towards without necessarily having to monotonously micromanage 53 to 75 players and either individually upgrade them yourself or basically be at the mercy of letting the CPU do it their way. And then lastly, I would add a few options for when this XP was applied. One option would be that XP could be used instantly and players would essentially progress immediately. And then one that I would really like to see is similar to how MVP baseball worked, where progression and regression didn't happen until the end of the off season. So basically what would happen is that the XP you were gaining and accruing over the course of a season would just build up rather than be applied and it wouldn't officially apply until the end of the off season. And the reasoning behind that is that I think it adds a little bit more interesting dynamic to the off season, in that you're almost forced to try and project where players will end up progressing and regressing when you're making your moves, rather than knowing that kind of stuff immediately like you currently do in Madden. So at the end of a season in Madden, you immediately know that this guy just regressed a whole bunch and that it's time to get rid of him. But if that kind of thing doesn't necessarily happen until after the off season, then that kind of forces you to project how that might happen. And like I said, I think it makes a little bit more interesting dynamic to the off season. But that's gonna do it. It's only a few changes there, but I think it would make progression more realistic and a bit more sensical than the way it currently works in Madden. Let me know what you guys think of XP and progression, and what you'd change, how you'd like to see it work. Also, let me know some of the things you'd like to see me talk about in these videos, because odds are a lot of the same issues that I have are going to be the same issues that you guys have. So let me know what's most important and what you want me to hit on first. The next one of these, I was planning on taking a dive into scouting, but beyond that, I'm not really sure. I'm going to have another group or series of videos as well, diving deeper into the different concepts and mock-ups that I've created or written about for CFM. So be on the lookout for that as well. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, thanks for watching.